delighted to have Mr. Rahul Bisaria to talk about his book, which has just come out. Its formal release is tomorrow, actually. So we just thought that we must have a discussion on this book. It is a very well researched and very readable book. We had Sati Lamba's book also discussed here. Ajayji was there at that time. And interestingly, out of the 25 Indian ambassadors and high commissioners who worked in Pakistan, 13 of them have written books about Pakistan. That shows the level of interest we have in India about Pakistan. So we invited Ajayji to tell us about this book. I have read it, very well researched. Anybody who wants to know about India-Pakistan relations, I would strongly recommend. The publisher has kept a stall there, 15% discount. If anybody wants to buy a copy, the author will be very happy to autograph it. May I now invite our secretary, Mr. Prakash Nanda, to introduce Ajayji.
Thank you. Welcome you all. And as our president has already said, Mr. Bisaria is a career diplomat. And after his retirement, I think at this very moment, he is very well known as a commentator on international affairs. And he's a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. He joined the Foreign Service in 1987 and in a career spanning 35 years dealt with some of India's key economic and security relationships. He served as India's High Commissioner to Pakistan from 2017 to 2020. I think you were the last. After that, nobody has succeeded you there. He has been India's High Commissioner to Canada 2020 to 22 and India's ambassador to Poland and Lithuania, that was in 2015 and 17. He has represented the country at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. and embassies in Berlin and Moscow. He has also served in various capacities in the Ministry of External Affairs, Department of Commerce, and the Prime Minister office, where he was a key aide to late Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee from 1999 to 2004. Education-wise, he has a bachelor's degree in economics from St. Stephen's College here, and an MBA from IIM Calcutta and master's degree in public policy from Princeton University, United States. So welcome, Mr. Pita.
Thank you. Thank you, Prakash. May I now invite Mr. Bisaria to tell us about what went into this book, how we came to write about it, and his comments on the India-Pakistan relations. Pakistan is going to polls the day after tomorrow. We thought this would be a good occasion to have a discussion on a book on India-Pakistan relations written by Mr. Bisaria. Mr. Bisaria.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Venkat, and thank you to the FCC for having me. It's a great opportunity. As you said, Venkat, the last time we were here to discuss another former High Commissioner's book, Mr. Satinder Lamba, who had unfortunately passed away after writing the book before seeing it in print. So it was a sort of tribute to his memory that we did. But, about perhaps we should jump into Q&A. This is a long answer to a short question, which a lot of people ask is, what do Indian diplomats do in Pakistan? What is it that we can do in this troubled relationship? What do they do? And what have we done for 76 years? And perhaps towards the end, it examines the question of what can be done differently to serve India's interests, to bring peace to the region, or to just have a future which looks different from the past. What this book does is to try and answer this question from the point of view of the Indian diplomats who were posted in Pakistan. And this is therefore, in a sense, in a historical sense, a subaltern view of history from some of the players who were actually present there and their perspectives. So the idea was to have in this, to tell a story of these 76 years and have the primary protagonist as the Indian diplomat who was positioned in Pakistan, and to see whether this story could be retold in a different way by delving into the memoirs, the accounts of these diplomats. So it is more than a history, it is more a practitioner's account of the diplomacy. But what it attempts to also do, I think, is to talk of the history and situating it in the context of developments in India, in Pakistan, and in the world across these decades. What you would have seen in the media, of course, is an account of one night in these 76 years. And that was particularly the account of what happened during the time of Balakot. But the book, I think, is more than that, trying to look at what was happening all these years. So what we do is, what I've done is started with an essay on what are the things that have been constant themes in this book. And the themes have been of security, of territory, and also of ideology, which have governed the behavior of Pakistan. And and then talked about 7 or 8 decades in chunks, in chapters, and talked about some of the compulsions, the wars, the conflicts, the terrorism that afflicted us, and the kind of diplomacy we deployed to deal with it bilaterally and globally, and ends perhaps with a bit of um, an uh, exploration of policy on what the policies have been like and what lessons history can teach us. These are ambiguous lessons, these are not clear lessons. And then talks about the way forward, or what could be the scenarios in the way forward as we go to our 100th year. Are we going to be shooting for a century, as one South Asian scholar said, Stephen Cohen, or are we going to uh, get a future different from the past, and what are the pathways for getting there? So I think these are some of the explorations, but it is essentially a practitioner's account of the history. Now, a couple of things that I've been asked, perhaps I should talk about that here, is why anger management? Why are we talking about anger? Whose anger is greater? Whose, and what anger are we managing? So essentially, the anger that we talk about has been a constant motif, a metaphor in this relationship. There is anger, if you see from the first word, brutal, the brutalization of partition. There was anger about the four conflicts that we have seen. There's been anger about multiple other things, about territory, Pakistan's anger about not being able to retain Kashmir, which it felt it was due to it. The anger about losing Bangladesh, the anger about what India did in Siachen, and India's anger at multiple terrorism events that happened over the decades in Punjab, in Kashmir, elsewhere. And equally, when we talk of policy, there has been a metaphor of management. And the whole idea or the proposition there is that you cannot uh, resolve this conundrum, you cannot resolve this problem, but what you can do is manage it in different ways smartly so that it doesn't get worse, it doesn't get nuclear, it remains at the level it is. So both anger in terms of a descriptor of the relationship and management in terms of a policy that we adopt has been part of the relationship, and therefore I've kind of juxtaposed the two metaphors to talk about anger management. The other interesting thing about anger management is a story which in 1971, there, Venkat, you've read the book, and in the 1971 portion, we talk about P.N. Huxer, who was Mrs. Indira Gandhi's strategic guru. So he said to her at some point, when he was guiding her through the 1971 war, or there was an influx of refugees from Bangladesh and from East Pakistan, and on dealing with it. So he said that statesmanship has two attributes. One is the effective expression of anger. You need that anger to be expressed. That's what democracies are about. And once having expressed that, it is about if it's effective management. So a lot of the times, politically, for policymakers, it becomes more seductive to let the anger be expressed and get out there, but then you lose control of the beast, and you don't know how to manage that anger. But statesmanship is about both things: expressing that anger and then managing it. So I think that is roughly the express version in 4 minutes of this book. Uh, but we can get into a conversation about any other aspect.
Then you quote Natwar Singh, one of your distinguished predecessors, as saying that the future of India-Pakistan relations lies in its past. You refer to that in the book. Um, so do you see, once we, in the year 2047, when we complete 100 years after the subcontinent was partitioned, the relations between India and Pakistan will be something like Germany and France, or South Korea, North Korea? What is your take?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what where we get to in 2047 really depends on the nature of our decisions now. And my argument would be that we need to learn from our mistakes, and clearly, leaders, particularly in Pakistan, made many good choices across these years. You know, the incident you mentioned of Natwar Singh uh, in the 1990s, he was sent off by Mr. Gandhi to Ziaul Haq, Pakistan, and he made that comment looking at the past and the history of partition, the wars. We'd been through 2 wars already. Uh, and what I found remarkable was he was being quoted in about 2015 by T.C.A. Raghavan, who was writing his book, and he found a lot of resonance in that statement that that the future of the relationship lies in the past. And if I wander into policy making or into uh, talking about policy, I would say that's exactly the lesson we need to learn. We should not repeat the mistakes of the past and get out of this constant cycle that we've got into, uh, get out of this chakra and break loose from it new policies, and particularly from Pakistan in its own self interest. It needs more imagination and better policies for India so that we can move towards some kind of modus vivendi of living as neighbors, if not as friends. And therefore, I think we need to be learning from that history and not the same wrong choices.
Also make the point that a strong Prime Minister in India and a strong army chief in Pakistan are possibly the people who can actually take an out of the box decision to bring both the countries together. And in India, you have more, looks like he's coming back for third term. I don't know who is going to succeed the current army chief in Pakistan, but do you think this kind of thing will ever happen? Modi will do business with army chief in Pakistan to restore normalcy between
I would look at 2024 with a lot of optimism, but cautious optimism. You know, this is a very accident prone relationship that happens. But I think in 2024, we have all the elements of possible improvement in the relationship. We have a situation where Pakistan gets into elections in 2 days. Clearly, these are the most predictable elections in Pakistan's history. They are possibly the most rigged elections in Pakistan's history. We know that the army is in charge. The army has selected Nawaz Sharif or one of its nominees as the prime minister. That will be the outcome we will see. Uh, and uh, we may have a situation where both countries have fresh mandates by the middle of the year and fresh civilian governments. So if both Modi and Nawaz Sharif are in power and in their legacy terms, they would feel the political need to leave a legacy which is positive, of peace, of having resolved this problem than having gone to war. And also, I think there would be a situation where, because of Pakistan's poly crisis, these elections are unprecedented in the sense that Pakistan is an unprecedented poly crisis since at least 2021 of a economic crisis, a security crisis, as well as a political crisis, because they don't know what to do with the problem called Imran Khan, which is continues to be a problem even though the man is in jail. So to deal with all these crises and at the same time to have troubled borders with Iran, with Afghanistan, is a situation where I think the army itself is going through a rethink. So if that rethink is towards making Pakistan a normal country, which means try to normalize the economy, not deploy terrorism against neighbors, and therefore try to make peace with various neighbors, sustain the ceasefire, I think there is a possibility that we might see some as we go.
What do you think is going to happen in the election day after Pakistan? Is Imran a factor? Is Bilawal a factor? Is India a factor? Because we haven't seen much of campaigning. Imran is in jail. Bilawal aspire power, maybe in the next generation. What's your take on
So, the only real factor that matters is the army. The army is the factor in this election. And the army has gone through, Pakistan has never really had elections except for once in 1970 under Yahya Khan, where he was expecting a different result, but as a result of which Pakistan broke up into two. Because that election led to a shocking result of Rahman getting a majority and not acceptable to West Pakistan and to Bhutto and the army at that point of time. So I think since then, to a lesser or higher degree, all elections have been controlled, rigged, you know, steered in by these elections. Perhaps are different for being so brazenly interfered in by the army that we have a situation where everyone in Pakistan seems to know the outcome for the election, even though the popular sentiment is clearly in favor of Imran. He's in jail. So, there are a lot of cricketing analogies that are going on in Pakistan. So they're saying that Imran Khan is not just in jail, the former captain. His bat has been snatched from him. The election symbol has been given away. And he's been clean bowled twice in a row. Three judgments have come to him while he's sitting in prison. One sentencing him for 14 years, the next for 10 years, and the third even annulling his marriage for at the Iddat case for 7 years. And one of the arguments being made in Pakistan's media is that why did they need to do the third and even stoop to such a level to talk about his marriage? And the reason perhaps is that that appeals to the religious right, that he is not as righteous as made out to be. So the message that is coming from the army is not just to the politicians, not just to Imran Khan, but also to the vote, because the pesky voter from the army, despite all this heavy election engineering, is still seems to be keen to vote for Imran Khan, who happens to be in prison. So we have a situation where in one of my pieces I called Imran the X who doesn't go away. So no matter what you do with him, you put him in prison, you lock him up, you take away his all his election apparatus, but he's available there, out there in ether, in social media as an artificial intelligence clone, and it appears that a large number of the young people of Pakistan, and they'll have an overwhelmingly young kind of electorate, are sort of disgruntled with the current system and would want to vote for him. And yet, this is an outcome that the army does not want, because in its selection, Nawaz Sharif is already selected. So the result of this is that uh, the situation is that Pakistan's army's message to the voter is that you have to choose from the menu of options given to you. Imran Khan is not a dish on the menu. You cannot order that, and please do not even consider that. So I think not just my prediction, but all Pakistan watchers seem to be saying it's a hugely rigged election. And despite a wave even in Punjab in favor of the PTI, there would be an pre-election engineering, election day engineering, and post-election engineering to ensure that the outcome that the army wants will be the one enforced.
Lot of Imran's party men, PTI, they are fighting the elections as independent. And they've been complaining that, if Mangan is an election, one of the candidates and all that, are there enough independents belonging to the PTI who are in a position to be elected and possibly pose a challenge to Nawaz Sharif's Pakistan? Number one. Number two, one also hears that, the Pakistan army notoriously suffers from the 3-year itch. And one understands that they've sent a message to Imran's wife saying that you ask your husband to keep his mouth shut for 3 years. You might need him after 3 years. If he likes it, he can go and live in London, but he should not say anything. Have you heard about this? What is your take on that?
So, there is a great deal of speculation going on about the possible outcomes in Pakistan, and a lot of it seems to be out there in the media. And yes, this story about the 3-year itch is a fact. I mean, the no prime minister has completed a term. For Nawaz Sharif, in each of the 3 terms, the 93 term, the 96 term, and the 2013 term, each time in 3 years, the army tried to get rid of him. And the reason was that as any prime minister discovers that there are other people who are overseeing decisions on both security and foreign policy, and he tries to wriggle out of that situation. And then what happens is that the army simply gets rid of them. So uh, the speculation that we heard in some of the media is that Imran Khan is being given an option to move out for 3 years, either be sitting quietly in his gala residence or to move to London. And the 3-year sort of term is very interesting because it really shows that 3 years later he might be required in case the chosen prime minister is not behaving to pull this one back and bring the next one in power. So I think we have a situation where a great deal of cynicism about this, and the role of independence that you mentioned. They are important because don't forget that in the pre-election engineering, they broke up Imran's party into several parts, led by Jahangir Tareen, another led by Parvez Khattak. And these are, and a lot of the Imran Khan supporters were jailed. They were let out of jail in what is called Pakistan's software update. They were asked to come out and then sing praises of the army and get out of support to Imran Khan. And these people will certainly be a factor. From the army's point of view, from its managing politics point of view, the best case scenario is a weak coalition with no one party or person really very strong, so that it could be managed better. So I think that is the kind of outcome we are getting into.
Do you see a generational change happening in Pakistan? Maybe next time Bilawal Bhutto versus Miriam Sharif. And the other thing is, it doesn't match. And I found people, common people, so friendly and hospitable to visitors from India, particularly. It's amazing. And it's only the generals, when they are in power, they, maintain hostile stance towards India. But when they retire, they say track two, let's be friends, and that kind of thing. What has been your experience while you are in Pakistan?
Correct. So on the gen next of Pakistan politics, yes, we have Bilawal Bhutto already, who's spent some time in government as the foreign minister. So he's the PPP's choice, and he has a bright future, I think, ahead of him in politics. We have Mariam Nawaz on the PMLN side, who will be fighting an election for the first time. PTI, we don't see a second rung, but perhaps that will emerge. So certainly there is a movement towards, uh, encouraging younger people to be part of politics, and because the electorate is young, there's a very young electorate, and there is a strong percentage of people who are currently, in a position where they would like a change in the politics. Therefore, they would look for it. So I think the important thing there is that this young generation needs to reach in the politics, because what is the business model of politics? That I'm a politician, I'll go to the army and say, you clobber my opponent, bring the level playing field means level him to the ground and bring me up, and I become the prime minister. And so I sort of, the PMLN has done it, the PPP has done it, and Imran himself had done it. But if they had a charter of democracy, the civilian politicians got together and then negotiated with the army that it should step back from politics. That is the hope, that the young politicians would take steps in this direction. So far, no indication that they are going in that direction. Your second question about the paradox of Pakistan. There is a lot of latent goodwill, but there is also a lot of latent ill will, and a lot of people, when hostile during the day, were very friendly in the evening for an Indian diplomat. But also, people talk a lot about peace and friendship uh, after they were given up their position. So there is a certain structural push towards the army wanting to sort of establish itself as an important player, and therefore playing up through history the paranoia about India and India wanting to take over Pakistan and so on. But that is no longer required. So the hope is that Pakistan decides that in its own enlightened self-interest, a better relationship with India, becoming a more normal country is important, and that normalcy means retaining or regaining the monopoly of violence, which they have given to these militant organizations. No state can survive in the long run when it gives up the monopoly of violence. States are supposed to preserve it. And therefore, if they move in a direction of retaining this monopoly and dismantling all these regimes and militant organizations, there is hope that Pakistan can move in that direction, and therefore see a self-interest in a better relationship with India, or at least a non-inimic relationship with India.
The session is now open for Q&A. Those of you who have a question to ask, kindly raise your hand and wait for a microphone to come to you. And then identify yourself and ask the question.
Sir Ramananda Sengupta from Stratton. I just want to know that we all know that the army runs Pakistan. Yet there is an argument that says that if we talk to the army directly and not the politicians, they're undermining democracy in Pakistan. Is that a valid argument?
I think that's political and policy dilemma, which we will have all the time. But I think in a realist world where you deal with people in power, uh, you you need to be dealing with the army in whichever way. There can be creative ways of actually doing it. But if you're dealing with a country run by an army, you have to be dealing with the army. That is your national interest in having sustainable solutions to whatever you're dealing with. So I think in the US it used to be said of 1971 that or of the 1970 that it took a Nixon uh, and a Republican to go to China because dealing with a communist regime, and there was a lot of if it was a Democrat, the argument would have been different. That but U.S. interest trumped values, and in a realist world, we ought to be looking at interests much more seriously, and looking at a situation where we talk to Pakistan's army because that is the source of power in that country. And what I advocate is triangulating whatever we do with the civilian government, with a conversation with the army. But but I think essential to having any sustainable uh, agreement with Pakistan is talking to the army. We've seen the opposite happen on at least on several occasions, but two recent ones in memory were the biggest initiative India took in 1999 with the Vajpayee's bus yatra to Lahore. Everything seemed to be going great. A wonderful Lahore declaration came out of it, but the army was not on board. Musharraf was not on board, and he was planning Kargil. So we should have, perhaps by hindsight, had a channel to Musharraf's army and checked whether he was on board before such a major initiative. And similarly, when PM Modi goes in 2015 and drops in Lahore, the army feels very unhappy about it. And we get a Pathankot and we don't get a sustained solution. So perhaps we need to be talking to the army, doing the deals with the army, and then taking the civilians on board rather than the other way
Ajay, congratulations for your book, Anger Management. I am Professor Neelam Mahajan Singh, formerly with Doordarshan News. Now I'm a columnist and an author, and my book on Kashmir is also underway. And I have covered India Pakistan when I was with Doordarshan News at the secretary level meetings. And since you are a Stefanian, I'm a Stefanian, Foreign Minister, Dr. Singh was a Stefanian, Salman Khurshid was a Stefanian, Ashok Mukherjee was a Stefanian, and Salman used to tell me it looked like St. Stephen's College, Ministry of External Affairs. Coming to your book, see, we've had a long history with India Pakistan, with Manishankar being Manishankar Iyer being the ambassador, Ambassador Partha Sarthi, and coming to the Shimla Accord, right? And then Rajiv Benazir meeting. And so many things have, there have been peace initiatives between India and Pakistan. But why is it even the out of the box dropping our Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the marriage wedding of the daughter of um, Nawaz Sharif Sahab. So why is it that we have a very strong foreign policy? Prime Minister Vajpayee also said we cannot change our neighbors, so we should go into peace. So you, as a distinguished diplomat, ambassador, and your book and anger management, why can't there be some mechanism where peace exists between the two nations? Because there are lots of deaths and casualties, because I come from Kashmir and I know how many people are dying in cross-border terrorism and, militancy, even partially, even if it exists. So can you please tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, so that is precisely the conundrum that we are discussing. There are no easy answers on why we don't have peace. But peace has been attempted. It has failed multiple times, and in in our by perfect hindsight, clearly there have been structural problems, and one of the structural problems is the primacy of Pakistan's army in Pakistan, everything in its foreign policy, in its polity, in determining the decisions. And that is one of the key factors why we have not been able to have peace. So, what we perhaps need to do is to engage with this army. So what I advocate is a two-track kind of policy where we have active defense, which means we are unrelenting and unforgiving on terrorism. And we react very strongly to terrorism to reduce the incentives for the Pakistan army to attempt any kind of terrorism of the kind we saw 5 years ago in Pulwama. But and while at the same time engaging in a flexible, calibrated way. Now is not a good time to engage when there's no coherence in Pakistan for the elections, but later engaging with Pakistan because I don't think strategic neglect of Pakistan is good policy.
Okay. So you spoke about the religious extreme right. They cannot operate in a vacuum. Obviously, the army may have become religious extreme right too within the army. Plus, you have the extra muscle power with China as another player that might egg on the army, the religious right, and all that. Why give India a rest? What do you have to say to that?
So I think both the factors you mentioned are very important. The army and the religious right got into a relationship, a cohabiting relationship, not now, but from the 70s and even more in the 80s in Ziaul Haq's, where Ziaul Haq decided to weaponize and use the religious right in what you would recall was called the MMA, then it was called the uh, Military Alliance. And that was because the army had decided on the model of uh, ruling Pakistan, and therefore it needed to co-opt society. It felt that a large part of the society was, or to the right, was very religious, and therefore to gain legitimacy for their own dictatorships and completely legal, defying the constitution regimes, they needed to co-opt the right and sort of rule from a position of the righteousness on the right. And that's what Ziaul Haq did successfully. And that is why a large number of these regimes were created. But they were also created for another purpose, and they were weaponized to deal with neighbors. So we had in the 70s for dealing with the Soviet Union as part of the Cold War, the creation of jihadi terrorism and this whole culture of jihad that was created. And that itself led to Pakistan, us having a lot of militant organizations and even more of a religious right. Even the TTP, even the TLP, Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, is being deployed by the army in different ways. So I think that is a fact of what Pakistan has done. The flawed choices made by its leaders have brought this, and as they say, as Hillary Clinton famously said, the snakes have come to bite people in their own backyard. The other factor of China is a real factor. What used to be a strategic partnership in right from the early days in the 50s, 60s has now become a relationship of abject economic dependence and a strong sort of partnership between Pakistan and China, which India has to be very conscious of because it could in future be a worst case scenario of a common front. And India has to deal with that reality, both in terms of military and diplomatic engagement.
Ashok,
Ajay, the question is that you have talked about the engaging with the army. That's a good suggestion. But let us not forget that there is a protocol. How should we engage with the army? Because at the state level, heads of state level, the protocol is there. We are engaging. So how do we engage with the army?
In a word, creatively. So that's what diplomacy is about. We need to engage with the power, but Pakistan would say that no, please engage with our civilian prime minister, and that has been the situation. But there were ways of doing it either behind the scenes, in a non-public kind of way, or even in a structured way. We already have a structured engagement with the Pakistan Army on operational matters. Every Tuesday, the DGMO of India and the DGMO of Pakistan have a conversation about managing the boundaries and managing the line of control. We already have some creative ways of engaging with the Pakistan Army behind the scenes, and that's how we got the ceasefire of 2021. There was no high commissioners, and yet there were conversations, and we got a ceasefire that has sustained itself for all these years. So there cannot be perhaps a structured and overt dialogue, but there ought to be a communication between the security establishment of India and a security establishment of Pakistan. The difference is that the security establishment of India will work under the supervision of the political leadership, while that in Pakistan is the leadership.
The army suffered a loss of face in 2022 after the mobs went into the street and went into the colonel's house and the general's house and all that. That loss of face, that
2023, yeah.
loss of credibility, is the army trying to, will it try to somehow recover from that position by show of military might, or by making it difficult for the civilian authorities to actually improve relations with Pakistan? With India?
That's
So
correct.
is the military going to do that? And that's one. And second, are you supposed to be worried about the US arming Pakistan with F-16s and other things? Is the US playing a game in which it has one leg in Pakistan and another in India? Are we supposed to be worried and careful and conscious about it?
Yeah. So, on the point of the army, you are right. The army did face a huge problem, and a problem of its own creation, because Imran Khan, at the end of the day, was their creation in 2018. And in 2021, they assessed that he had gone rogue, and therefore he needed to be controlled. So what he needed to be done was that it, politics needed to be engineered. That in April 22, he was voted out in a vote of confidence, which was helped by the army. And then we saw the events you referred to on the 9th of May 2023, where the army said that it's Imran Khan's supporters, when he was arrested, were challenging the writ of the state and so on. So we are dealing with an army that is sort of has a siege mentality about the politics, and is unhappy about what happened with Imran Khan and didn't understand how to deal with it. So what happened with them was that after the army itself was divided, and the army was going through a transition. So it was moving from being Bajwa's army to being Asif Munir's army, and in that period, they faced a major transition. And as a result of this transition, what happened was that they lost control of the politics. So the army runs everything, right? It runs the economy, it runs to a large extent, it runs the security policy, the foreign policy, and the politics. The easiest war the army runs is against its own people. That it finds it easier to control politicians, to jail them, to remove one, get the other. But on the Imran Khan factor, because of his huge street power and popularity, they didn't know how to bottle him up, and therefore, what I see today in Pakistan is a measure of desperation, because despite all this heavy engineering, they feel the problem hasn't gone away, and that's why they have to keep pushing Imran Khan more to a corner with multiple sentences rather than just one. So I think this is a problem that the army sees, that it is weakened, but at the moment it has taken control, and it controls all the levers of power, and has no intention of giving them.
I'm Ravi Shankar Kapoor, a freelance journalist. I want to know, you talked about the culture of jihad. Now, what this culture of jihad, the radicalization that Pakistan has undergone in the last 75, or especially in last 40 years, will that allow the bilateral ties to improve, even if the army and the civilian government in Pakistan are on the same page and they want two ties?
So I think that is precisely the policy recommendation I would make if I was the Grand Tsar designing policy for India and Pakistan both. That Pakistan adopted a strategic culture of jihadism, and it was cheap policy because you don't have to spend much in getting a jihadist culture. There is, they were called cannon fodder. So this cannon fodder of the Jaish-e-Mohammed are people who were infiltrating and were being taught to run a jihad just by training them for a month or 3 months. But the question is that I think what India's policy should be to impose a cost on this strategic culture, which becomes unacceptable to Pakistan. So what used to be very cheap 5 years ago is now expensive. That if you do a Pulwama, you don't just get away with strong statements, you get a Balakot. And that puts you into the danger of getting into a war. So I think, therefore, you need to rethink your strategy of using terrorists and terrorism against India, because it will have a high cost. And I think even in Pakistan's own interest, if you forget, this is what is being told to Pakistan by everyone. The US said that to Pakistan with the raid in 2011 and the taking out Osama bin Laden. Afghanistan has been saying that for a long time, that the Quetta Shura and the Haqqani network were directed, they should have bombed them long ago. The Iranians said that last month. And even the Chinese have been saying that there are some terrorists holed up in Pakistan who are anti China. So, therefore, if the cost is escalated by all the neighbors and stakeholders, and then Pakistan realizes that it is not in their interest to use this strategy anymore. So, that is the hope of ending the culture of jihad.
So one.
Ajay, just a very quick question. If you keep the Pakistan army as a constant, who is better news for India, Nawaz Sharif or Imran Khan?
Well, I think going by the history, certainly Nawaz Sharif, because he, in his watch, twice at least in the past week, almost breakthroughs. Prime Minister Vajpayee decided to take a risk and chance on him. In his move, Mr. Modi met him. Don't forget, in the first 2 years of Modi, there were 5 meetings with him and Nawaz Sharif, and fairly cordial meetings. And India recognized that he was trying, and the army behind the scenes trying to sabotage the initiatives. Uh, my own assessment of Imran Khan has been that his initial thoughts were also in the same direction, that you need to make peace with India. But somewhere his inexperience showed when he overreacted to Article 370, lost the plot. But I think basically all the civilian politicians of Pakistan would favor doing diplomacy with India and trying to get to peace rather than initiating wars.
So one question. Can I ask a question?
Yeah. In fact, you just now mentioned Article 370. That's what I'm trying to ask. You were talking of managing these things in future. How much a role or rather factor this abrogation of Article 370 going to be? And why I'm asking you this question, because in your introductory remark, you talked of some cycles. I do not know, because I'm afraid I'm not gone through the book. I don't know how you have described those cycles. But to me, when one talks of cycle, I think there was a very standard format of all these India, Pakistan, and the discussions in the sense, particularly after Rajiv Gandhi and Benazir Bhutto meeting sometime in 1988. And these are these so-called CPM points, 5 or 6, in which Kashmir, then for us the terrorism, then of course action, then SARC, and I think that economic measure. So what was that cycle is that you start some negotiations on one or two of these things. It capture the headlines, then some event occurs, and then everything stops, and then again you start from. I think that was this vicious cycle that was going on. But importance of this in Kashmir was that it provided some sort of incentive, in the sense that if terrorism was our main priority for Pakistanis, it provided them some incentive that they are not talking of Kashmir, and particularly as you know that Musharraf time and UPA Manmohan Singh talking of not exactly using the word, shared sovereignty, that rally, open border, things of that sort. But now that Article 370 has been scrapped, and India's position in Kashmir, that way has been, it is totally a different situation. In this sort of thing, do you think, is it practical on the part of any Pakistani politician, even if it is Nawaz Sharif, and I think I agree that he is the most friendly politician. The most unfriendly politician, I think, is the Benazir Bhutto and PPP people. They say something when they are out of power, but they are the most vicious when they are in power. And that being the case, how you will be developing this? I'm talking of this particularly this new situation now.
So I think that's a very interesting question, and I have dealt with it at great length in my book. So you'll find it interesting when you go through it. But you referenced the what we had called the composite dialogue, the 8-track dialogue, which was a diplomatic innovation to take care of the issue of the bilateralism that India had insisted on 70 Shimla Treaty in dealing with Kashmir. And then India said that we have no problem discussing Jammu and Kashmir along with other issues, so terrorism among them. And there was an 8-track policy. This was started in 96, 97, 98. We had nuclear tests, nuclear dimension was added to it. But so this composite dialogue went on fairly robustly from 2004 to 7, which was Vajpayee's initiative, and then taken forward by Manmohan Singh. But then 2008 Mumbai happened, so it went out. But India nevertheless persisted and went on and called it the resumed dialogue. But now, as you're saying, after Article 370, Pakistan took the position that we come to unless Article 370 is reversed. But what strategically has happened with Article 370 is that India has made the determination domestically that Pakistan has no locus standi on Jammu and Kashmir. We are having an internal conversation with the people of Jammu and Kashmir in the center on various things related to autonomy or special status and so on. And that is a robust and ongoing conversation. Pakistan has no locus standi in that conversation. What Article 370 did not do is change the line of control. Therefore, Pakistan is not party to this. So, what India has done consciously now is have a separate Pakistan policy, which is foreign policy, with a separate Jammu and Kashmir policy, which is an internal policy. And that distinction is not very clear. And that was not entirely clear to Pakistan in the past. So I think this is what has changed. And even with this government, we were going to start the same 8-track dialogue in 2015, just after PM Modi's visit. But that was shelved because the terrorism started again. But I think in the future, we are ready, India is ready for a conversation on all issues, including Jammu and Kashmir. But changing the status or having Pakistan as a party to India's discussions internally is off the table. That's not on the
Dr. Awad?
Thank you. Mr. Ajay, you read anger management, the troubled diplomatic relation between India and Pakistan when it comes to the level of the government levels. We can understand. But covering the both sides of the story, you see that you have more trouble now and throwing it into a public domain. So become very difficult to really negotiate or even find a solution or deal with the anger management in public because the anti-India, anti-Pakistan feeling is increasing and it is evidence everywhere. That's one of the issues, which is if being a diplomat, you think it would have been much better to be dealt at the governmental level, or it should be given to the public domain that they can do it. The second part of my question is, what is really in interest of India? Is it an interest of India that disintegration of Pakistan? If you think that disintegration of Pakistan can take place, is it of the interest of India? Thank you.
Thank you. I think two great questions. On the issue of the disintegration of Pakistan, I think uh, the India has no locus standi in anything that happens within Pakistan. If that happens because of the poly crisis that Pakistan goes through, it will be because of the internal fault lines of Pakistan becoming unmanageable. Already the TTP from Afghanistan is coalescing with the whole Balochistan insurgency, with the Khyber Pashtun problem, and so on. So this is a problem for Pakistan to manage. India has no real role. I mean, you could theoretically ask, is it a good thing? There could be multiple theoretical answers that it's also not a good thing to have a rump state with nuclear powers. So I think for India, it has no role in determining the kind of direction Pakistan takes in terms of which way it goes, whether it breaks up 5 or whether it continues in a scenario of muddling along despite all these contradictions. But on the other question, I think that's a very important issue of the people to people relationship. Because what happens is that with the government to government relationship getting poisoned, the people relationship is not unaffected. It is affected by the official narratives. But at the same time, we need to see that there are phases in the relationship when the government relationship improved, the people to people relationship, the latent goodwill was expressed. So in 2004, after Vajpayee's visit to Islamabad and we signed the Islamabad agreement, after that, for 3 years, if you visited Pakistan for the cricket matches, for instance, cab drivers would charge anything. So there was so much goodwill. So the cultural intimacy between the people is still there. It's still very strong. And I think diplomacy should recognize it and deploy it in the future. But the relationship is otherwise in such a jam that the people relationship is also affected, particularly in terms of visas, travel, because there is no good way of filtering the people who could be potential terrorists in an open border situation. Therefore, that becomes very hard to give visas. There have to be multiple filters in order to ensure that the security objective is also met. So I think in a future, in a brighter, distant future, we shouldn't let go of this cultural diplomacy and the strong cultural intimacy, the love for the same cuisine and song, and particularly the relationship between the two Punjabs. Something that we can use uh, at a time when the relationship improves. And for India, the key reason why the relationship dips is terrorism. So if you see that after 2008, Mumbai, the relationship really went down. Multiple terrorist events in 2016, uh, the relationship dipped. 2019, Pulwama dipped. We've gone touchwood 5 years without major terrorism, minor terrorism, and therefore I feel we have a situation where the relationship can improve, barring another major.
Last two questions.
Well, during your tenure there, and now how deep is ISI involved in creating problems for our country and for you there?
Well, the ISI is a state within a state. It had multiple sword arms. So it was an organization that feels it has a dominance in foreign policy. So it is more Rawalpindi that makes foreign policy and India policy than than Islamabad. So uh, the conversations we as diplomats or Indian diplomats have are fairly good with the Foreign Office, but the goons who are involved in harassing, they often come into play, and they are often deployed as sort of operations to destabilize us. So I would say that it is not a major problem. We don't feel physically in danger, but there is some harassment and irritants on the ground in the functioning of Indian diplomats. But on the issue of the role of the ISI within India, well, that is the nature of this relationship and the nature of Pakistan's agencies. They want to fish in any troubled waters in India. They would want to, exploit the fault lines, widen them, create fissures, run daggers to the fissures. And don't forget that the 80s, what we saw in Punjab, the 90s, what we saw in Kashmir, the 2000s, what we saw across the country, were ISI sponsored acts of terrorism and promoting insurgency.
Sir, my last question. Mostly for the last 75 years, the army played a major role in Pakistan, whether it is a political party ruling or something. Unless army support is there, they can't run for complete period. So many of these politicians, the army generals, they faced after dethroning them corruption charges. And the Lahore High Court and Supreme Court of the Pakistan sentenced them on corruption charges.
Sentenced whom?
The politicians,
The politicians. Yeah.
who ruled the country,
Yes.
Nawaz Sharif, now Imran Khan, and all. What about this army respect the judiciary?
Yeah, so I think it's
Because
it's a-
ultimately it is validated through the court order, their ruling, their decisions,
Yeah.
everything.
So through Pakistan's history, the judiciary has played a role of being a handmaiden of the army. It has played a shameful role in the past. Ayub Khan's rule, military rule, was sanctioned by the judiciary under the doctrine of necessity. Uh, Musharraf's rule was not punished. So you're right, the civilians have been punished for the most flimsiest of corruption charges, but the army's corruption has not been punished, and the treason of taking over the country and constitutionally taking over in a coup has gone unpunished. None of the dictators of Pakistan, whether it was Ayub or Yahya or Zia or Musharraf, were ever punished, even though the judiciary sporadically tries to make a case of Musharraf was sentenced. The sentence never punished. He stayed happily in Dubai all his time. They die peacefully in their bed or in explosions of crates of mangoes. But but they were never punished. So I think this is, and the judiciary's role is recognized in Pakistan as having been acting as the junior partner of the army. Nawaz Sharif was removed in a judicial coup. The three cases on Imran Khan were laughable, absurd, delivered by judges sitting in that prison for 10 hours, 14 hours, under instructions from somewhere. So it's certainly not proven to be an independent judiciary by any stretch, except in some very rare cases.
Um, I just want to announce that on Thursday we have the Foreign Minister of Bangladesh for an exclusive interaction. If any of you are interested, you're most welcome. There are two more things to happen. I invite Simran to present a memento to Ajay. May I request Dr. Awad to propose a vote of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Ambassador Ajay Bisaria. It's not only that we have enjoyed your informative and comprehensive and balanced talk. In fact, it is rarely these days we see such kind of calm in talking in terms when it comes to Pakistan. I mean, even if I have to have a biryani, I would have had a problem. On behalf of the Foreign Correspondent Club and myself, we thank you for accepting our invitation. And I am sure every one of us, and on behalf of all the audience also, we thank you. And I must say that being so much informative, I am very keen now to have this book because I'm sure there will be lots of things in the book which you have not been able to speak it out. And many interaction with the club, you're most welcome. You are very familiar with our clubs. You know the members, foreign journalists, Indian journalists, corporate member. So it's your place to be here anytime. And thank you all for being a very good listening without any fighting, without any firecrackers. Thank you.
Simran.